Okay, we're going to be talking about comparing two texts and the sort of things you could mention or the things you could prepare for before completing a comparative or a compare and contrast essay. The first and the most obvious thing is the text type. So ideally you're comparing a book with a film or a film with a play or some combination of these three. Makes it a little bit easier if they're two novels or two films or two plays. There's still a lot to talk about, but it makes it a little bit easier if you have the option to talk about the ways that certain text types are different in your essay. So at this point, it might be prudent to note down a couple of things for each text. So when each was published, how long each one is, how many pages, that sort of basic information. And also, here also, if they're different, the features of each text type. So a play typically features a lot of dialogue, whereas a book features something of a mix between dialogue, action, and description. And a film has a lot more visual language, obviously being a visual medium, but also it can have a mixture of action and dialogue. So the next thing is the creator. So the author, the director, or the playwright. This one's a little bit harder, it takes a little bit of research. You could be talking about things like the gender, the age, or the generation that the creator is from, their personal history, their upbringing, their educational background, their racial background, their ancestry. This one's a bit trickier. Preoccupations or common themes across all of the texts, and for this you might need to read a little bit extra, watch a couple of extra films by that director, or read a couple more plays from them, or maybe even just read sort of the study notes on that to get a vague idea of the themes that are common across all of their works. Elements of style is a bit broad and a bit difficult to cover in much great detail, but depending on your author, there might be some things that are really obvious about their style. Directors as well, they might have certain actors they like, certain shot types they prefer. Playwrights, it's all up in the air for them. Perhaps they like certain ways of speaking, they prefer monologue or an interaction between characters, they cut each other off often in their dialogue, those sorts of things. And the last thing is just the filmography, the playbill, and the list of publications for the director, the playwright, and the novelist or the author. This is the most obvious and the first thing that springs to most people's minds when they think of comparing two texts, the plot of each text. So firstly, the establishment or the beginning of the text. Does it start in the present day? Does it start in the past? Is it a flashback? Is it a flash forward? The conflict, this is sort of the juicy problem. What is the problem? Is it a wedding? Is it a feud? Is it violence? Is it a police chase? What is the central concern of the story? The resolution is the ending. So are all the plot strands tied together? Is it a satisfying ending? Is it a non-satisfying ending? Is it a happy ending, a sad ending? Really basic things can really draw out some quite nuanced understanding based on how you analyse them. You might also consider what are the acts of conflict, what are the acts of violence, what are the acts of love. These things typically are the high points of any story, and it might help you to look for these. So in terms of plot, you might think about stories like The Goldfinch or Fight Club, where they start at the end of the story, then explain how that was gotten to. That's quite a common occurrence. Or it could be quite a simple linear narrative, such as a fairy tale, where it starts, there's a middle, then there's an end, and everything is concluded. Alright, so the next thing is themes. What are the themes of each text? So you're looking for maybe 3 to 5 for each text of shared themes, firstly. Maybe there are some things that are held in common between the two texts, and also unique themes, so things that are unique to each text. The next thing is symbols. So what objects or images are used to send certain messages? In a film, this is really easy to notice because maybe there's a certain type of bird, a type of animal, it could be anything really that signifies a certain thing, maybe a state of mind in the character or a certain event, maybe it foreshadows something that is about to happen. So you're thinking of things like a dagger, weapons, visions, darkness, animals, cars. It could be any one thing, but the idea is that it's something to represent something else. The next thing is motif. So this is the really obvious stuff that comes up again and again. So reoccurring images or objects that are used to send a broader or a bigger message. So in To Kill a Mockingbird, it's the mockingbird. In Shakespeare's Macbeth, it's a dagger or a bloodstain. A flock of birds in Look Both Ways is a common motif. You're looking for things that reoccur really often. The next thing is the moral, the message, or the lesson. So after you'd finished watching, reading, or performing the text, what was the clear message that you had in your brain? If you showed it to a small child and they only drew one thing from it, what do you think that would be? So what is the creator trying to communicate about their text? This one's not important as the others, but it could be a good way to get you thinking about your text in a different way. So if you had to rate it, you were in charge of classification, what would you give it a rating of? So whether it's a play, a film, or a novel, would you give it a G, a PG, an M, an MA 15 plus, or an R rating? Would you show it to a toddler? Would you show it to a primary school student? Would you show it to a secondary school student? Would you show it to your mum? Would you show it to your grandmother, your father, your grandfather, someone who's more sensitive? And what sort of descriptors would you add? So would it be strong coarse language? Would it be frequent supernatural themes? What would you add as a descriptor to the rating you've given your text? Alright, the last one is language use. So this doesn't work especially well for films, but you could talk about the language of film and the way that images are constructed, but most obviously this works best for the novels and for the plays. So basic stuff, how long is each chapter? How would you divide up as a ratio the amount of dialogue, the amount of action, and the amount of description that each one has? The dialogue, is it colloquial, is it formal, is it informal, is it naturalistic, which means sort of it's realistic, or is it non-naturalistic, which basically means it's a little bit more forced, a little bit more Shakespearean, more monologues, maybe the play has characters that talk directly to the audience. Obviously this isn't a natural thing, as there's not typically an audience in most people's lives. Alright, and those are the things you can mention in your compare and contrast essay, and it might be useful to make a list of each of these before you complete your essay.